Why, hello there. It's Monday, it's a new week, and we're getting close to 2022. But of course, I think it was 2020 or 2021, we had a census, and Texas got two districts, or two elected for the House of Representatives, which means we have to redraw our maps. Now, the issue with redrawing maps is no matter how well you do it or how fair you could do it, people are always going to find a way to complain and say it's going to be something that it may not be. Now, unfortunately, I'm getting the source from the lying CNN, the Clown News Network, or the Clinton News Network. So you have to take it with a grain of salt, but I think it kind of gets the spirit of what the lawsuit's all about. So here is the story. Now, I wasn't really able to find any real maps, and I'm not going to go view this video. DOJ sues Texans saying GOP approved redistricting maps discriminate against Latinos and blacks. And also one or two Democratic elected House of Representatives, which I don't kind of agree with. I think there should have been like grandfathered in, like, hey, we're changing the districts, but we're going to let you keep your position. But it really doesn't matter because in the election year, everyone is up for re-election in the House. The Justice Department filed a lawsuit Monday challenging the legislative maps adopted by the Texas Republicans in recent weeks and says it fails to recognize the growth of the Latino population and discriminates against black voters. Now, it could be that, there's truth, a good portion of our population growth is from Latinos in the black community, but I wonder how many of those people are actually going into these black districts. Maybe those black districts or Latino districts neighborhoods aren't the greatest and they come from money, which there means that they can afford a nicer home, which are going in more into what some people will call wider neighborhoods. So we have to keep that with an open mind. Maybe it was done by population, but however, I don't like gerrymandering. Both parties do it. That's how California could stay blue, and that's how Illinois stays blue, and how New York stays blue, because they redistrict the map to make sure that the party in power stays in power. And it's not a Republican or a Democrat issue because both parties do it. But however, it is the Democrat that monopolize on the redistricting to keep minorities down. The lawsuit alleges that redistricting plan drawn by a Texas lawmaker violates the Voting Rights Act. The complaint we filed today alleges that Texas violated Section 2 by creating redistricting plans that deny or bridge the rights of Latino and black voters to vote on account of their race, color, or membership. I don't know what the membership means. In language, minority group. I guess they want to be a membership of a minority group. Attorney General Merrick Garland said at the news conference, I am so glad that he's not a Supreme Court justice. If this is the type of stuff that he's going to be pulling. The lawsuit targets both U.S. congressional map drawn for the next decade of elections and the plan for the state house. The legislature refused to recognize the state growing minority electorate, the lawsuit states, although Texas and congressional delegations expanded from 36 to 38 seats. The Texas designed two new seats have Anglo voting minority or majorities. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? That's where I guess the trial will come into it. After the 2020 census, Texas was awarded two additional seats in the House of Representatives. The population growth, which has created a new seat, which was propelled by a minority community with people of color making up 95% of the growth, according to the census data. Now, you got to keep in mind, was this growth isolated in one area which they chose to ignore, or were they spread out throughout the whole state of Texas? These are valid questions to say whether or not this is a political hit job from the DOJ, which I'm pretty sure it is. However, Texas has designated both of those new seats of having white voting majorities, said the Associate Attorney General The Anita Gupa instead our investigation determined that Texas redistricting plan will dilute the increasing minority vote strain that should have developed from these significant demographic shifts. It is the second voting right related lawsuit to Biden's administration that filed against the state this year. The Justice Department is also challenging restrictive voting measures, which are not restrictive. It gives you more options to vote, more days to vote, allows you to vote like full 2 weeks before the election, creates more polling places, but yet it takes away mail-in ballots, which means it's being restrictive and takes away drive-through voting and all that good stuff. That everything that allow people to fortify the election. The new lawsuit alleges that in drawing the U.S. congressional map, Texas intentionally eliminated Latino electoral opportunity in the Congressional District 23, West Texas, where courts have identified the Voting Rights Act violation during the previous 2 redistricting cycles. According to the lawsuit, Texas failed to draw a seat encompassing the growth of the Latino electoral in Harris County and exercise minority community from the core of Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. I mean, this is where redistricting does get hairy. There's a lot of things to consider. One is population growth. I'm pretty sure that Texas is kind of guilty of this to some extent because you got some weird shape electoral maps where they look like seahorses. It makes no sense unless you're trying to further straighten the Republican voting base. Texas also eliminated Latino electoral opportunities in the state house plan through manipulation or outright elimination of districts where Latino communities previously had elected their preferred candidates, said the lawsuit filed in the West District of Texas. Texas is already facing several private lawsuits challenging its new maps, which were signed into law in October by Governor Abbott after the GOP-controlled legislature approved them. And keep in mind, there's a lot of Latinos here in the GOP. There's probably a lot more black people in the GOP here in Texas. So that's going to be an interesting lawsuit. Spokesperson for Texas Secretary of State John Scott said it was who was the defendant in the lawsuit declined to comment in a tweet. The Officer General Ken Paxton called the lawsuit absurd and said it was the Biden administration latest ploy to control Texas voters. I'm confident in that our legislature redistricting decisions will be proven lawful, and this preposterous attempt to sway democracy will fail, the Attorney General office said. The absence of pre-clearance in decades past, Texas would have been required under the Voting Rights Act to obtain federal approval, either from the Justice Department or a federal court, before implementing the new maps. This is because of the Civil War and Jim Crow policies, which were done by Democrats, which were really gerrymandering, keeping minorities down under Democratic control. Therefore, as another layer of protection for the minorities, I think the Republican-controlled federal government put these limitations in place to protect minorities, from my understanding. Now, it could be wrong, but I think that's kind of where it comes from. The requirement known as pre-clearance was gutted in 2013 Supreme Court decision, Shelby County versus Holder. Without it, the Justice Department is challenging new maps under separate provisions of the law that would put the burden on the department to prove that the maps are discriminatory. Texas is no stranger to litigation about its line drawing. It's funny how you don't hear this about Democratic-controlled states that have been doing this, that have not been challenged, like Illinois, California, and New York. I'm just saying. Texas is no stranger to litigation about its line drawing and sought for the approval of federal court for its maps drew in 2010 in what became a legal fight that stretched throughout most of a decade. Garland on Monday noted the absence of the pre-clearance requirement and the impact of absent had on the department voting rights enforcement efforts by depriving it of an opportunity to review new maps before they go into effect. I want to again urge Congress to restore the Justice Department's pre-clearance authority where the pre-clearance tool is still in place. We will likely not be here today announcing this complaint, Garland said. Like I said, there's a reason for that, and that's because Texas, which was part of the Civil War states, or the states of rebellion, not to mention the the Democratic control during Jim Crow law, which did keep a lot of minorities down. Now, I'm not saying that the parties are equal footing as they were back then when these laws came into place. I am saying that the reason why the pre-clearance authority was because of Democratic policies when redistricting maps in the past, which were more geared towards a stronger white control or majority white control opposed to a more equal balance between the minorities and majority white. I think we've made great progress, and I don't know if we really need pre-clearance authority, but however, the pre-clearance authority is only a handful of states that participated in the state of rebellion and the Jim Crow policies. That's why you see some of the states like California, Washington, Michigan, and New York, and some other states that do not have this pre-clearance appointed to them because they weren't as racist as some of the southern states were. Yes, I will admit Texas and other southern states were racist while they were under control of the Democrats. Now, I'm not saying Republicans are much better, but I think this is more about Republican control opposed to actually giving minorities control. And I think that's where the Texas is probably going to might lose this case, but the federal government will have to prove that it's not based on population, but it's based on race. Now, it's probably true that more than 90% of our newcomers are minorities, but it also depends on where they decided to go. I don't think they went into these minority neighborhoods because some of those neighborhoods are not the nicest neighborhoods. They're kind of run down. They're more hoodish, more low income housing. And if these people are moving and they actually have money, they're not going to go to a poorer neighborhood. They're going to go to a middle class or higher class neighborhood, which will reflect how they redraw districts. I mean, that's not something that's mentioned into this article, but I'm sure if we were to dig a little bit more into the numbers, we'll find that's probably more true than not true. Anyways, leave a comment down below on what your thoughts are. Smash the like and subscribe button and all on any platforms or just the platform you're currently watching on. But most importantly, have yourself a wonderful day, morning, or evening.